Welcome back to another episode of On Coaching. I'm Steve Magness, the Deputy Director of High Performance West, author of Peak Performance, joined by my good friend and colleague, the Director of High Performance West, Jon Marcus. Jon, it's another lovely day talking podcast stuff.
Whew, back to give the people what they want. It's been a minute. I apologize for Steve. He's been traveling all over the globe, so we haven't been able to deliver. So
spreading the good word, though. Spreading the good word.
It's true. Well, since Steve's been out globally taking in the sights and sounds of the world, I've been busy upgrading and updating the High Performance West website. So I just want to say thank you, first off, to everyone who has come and, taken in the workout of the day offering we have now, which is every day you get a workout done by an athlete that we have some type of relationship with, whether we coached them, did the workout with them, observed it, had a friend or a colleague coach that workout. Every day it's a different workout for a different age or event group and different gender. So it's kind of just a mixed bag. It's just, like Google, feeling lucky. But what we want to do is provide a little bit of context about why that workout was employed, maybe what happened after or leading into it, so you can walk away and hopefully be a little bit better for that engagement and use it as a little bit of fuel to help your thought about different workouts to employ, whether you're a coach or an athlete yourself. And the questions that have been sent via direct message on Twitter or email for those workout of the days, like just people want a little further inquiry, they've been great. They've been really, they're just good questions and kind of hard to reply to because they're so good. But I make an effort and Steve makes an effort to get back to everybody. And then two, we also every day have that daily blog where it's just, again, a little reflection, a little anecdote, a little story about an experience Steve or I had in our coaching journey and some little nuggets of wisdom we may have picked up along the way. And that's what we got right now. More things are coming down the pipeline, more exciting things that, Steve and I will definitely share. But right now, that's what we have, and I just can't believe the number of people globally have come and, supported this. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Awesome. And in appreciation of that, if you head over to highperformancewest.com, and you are a day one person, right?
Our day one people, stand up. You're the reason. 3 years ago. It's been 3 years. Woo!
Has it really been that long? Jeez.
It has, yes. 3 years of this podcast.
I can't believe I've been talking to you for that long and, still talking with you. So, yeah, head on over to highperformancewest.com. We got a special giveaway for you. We're just going to give you guys some cool stuff because you've been with us from the get-go. So there'll be a tab up top that says day one. It'll be locked. You can only get into the tab if you type in the password. And the password is on coaching day one. All lowercase, all one word, on coaching day one. One is the number one, not spelled out. So on coaching day one, it will take you to a field where you have to give us our address. I won't come to your house, I promise. But we actually want to send you something in the mail to say thank you for listening since day one. How rare is that? Actually send something in the mail. Are you sure you know how to do that still?
I do. I have two friends who work at the post office, and it's alive and well. It's thriving. So again, it'll be up until the 15th of January, and it's our holiday cheer and thank you, and just our kind of to celebrate our 3-year anniversary and 60 plus episodes later. And now the High Performance West reboot, or what we're calling the new High Performance West journey that we're going on. So again, our thank you to you. Log on day one, highperformancewest.com. On coaching day one is the password, and I'm looking forward to sending you something soon.
Look at us giving away some Christmas cheer, all that good stuff. We really appreciate you guys who have been with us, and if it's not since exactly day one, if you're close enough, you qualify, right? So
Steve's a big softie, so
yeah. I am.
Me too. At the end of the day, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and this is our way. So it'll be a fun little gift, and we hope you enjoy it.
Sweet. So, getting into the podcast this week, a interesting topic, I think, hopefully you think so too, is looking at our coaching blunders almost, our common mistakes coaching the middle distance events. And this one is really interesting to me because coaching middle distance is hard.
Yes, it's very hard. Thank you. I'm glad someone said that.
Yeah. Someone the other day was asking me, it was like, what's your favorite event to coach? And I was like, oh, probably like the 5K or 10K. And they're like, well, why? And I was like, yeah, it's harder to mess up.
See, that's funny because mine is the 15. I love coaching the miler. The mile, the 1500 meter runner. Like, that's the reason I like it. It's such a hard challenge, and you can go at it from a variety of different angles and be successful. It's great.
Yeah, the interesting thing, and I was talking to a good friend, Gareth Sanford, out in New Zealand about this, and how with the 800 specifically, but even the mile is like, you have so many directly competing ideas and paradigms, which doesn't happen, for instance, in the marathon, right? Because like if you're gonna run a marathon, like we're arguing over like the small narrow bandwidth of like, oh, should we run 120 miles a week or 90 miles a week, or right, like, should our longest run be 22 or 19? Like, it's very small, right? But in the middle distance, we've had world-class milers running barely anything. We've had them doing all interval work. We've had them doing 100 miles a week plus. So, right. Like, not that those are the only factors that matter, but I think that uniqueness about it and that unique energy demand and the demands that you basically have to know everything, right?
Yes, you do. You have to know your stuff inside and out. You have to have a multidisciplinary education about a variety of not just complex energy systems and physiological, reactions, but as well as the psychology of it. Because how many times, right, have we watched the 1500 meter race and everyone's looking good through 800, and then there's this apathetic third lap every time for the majority of the field, and it ends up being, the podium finishers are the people who can get through this apathetic barrier that is met on this third lap of running, and then have enough juice to be able to race and kick. And it's really an interesting phenomenon because I've coached every level, and it happens at every single level, whether it's high school or the pros. And I always scratch my head. I'm like, wow, this is very consistent, no matter the gradient of experience or competency.
So this is a quick interlude before we get to our main topic, but we do that a lot, so that's okay.
Well, you wouldn't be here if you didn't love tangents.
Yeah. So my senior year of high school, I went from 417 down to 401 in the mile, right? And what's interesting is like I kept making jumps pretty much every race until I ran a 4:0. I think it was a 3:1600 split in a relay, and then 4:01 after that. But so I'd make jumps. So I'd go from like 417 to 412 to like 408 to 405 to 403 to 401. And the funny thing on that entire jump, the first and last laps stayed the same throughout.
Wow.
So they were always like 60, first and last. Like even when I ran 417, first and last laps the same. the second and third, and most of it from the third lap, right?
Right, yeah.
Would come down. Like I think when I ran 417, my third lap might have been like 67 or something like that.
Yeah, 60. Oh yeah, just gross positive split.
Just gross. And then it's like, rally, then puke afterwards. But what's always struck me is like I look back at those splits after I got done. I'm like, wow, like the beginning ending didn't change, but that third lap, like it was a process of like getting the strength, the work, the tolerance, the psychology to be able to like keep pressing on that lap enough to give me a shot. And you're right, like you see that all the time in the middle distance events, especially in the 1500 or mile, is there's this just slight settling that occurs as almost, and I think a lot of it is psychological, almost as you build towards, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have one lap left and I need to have like something in the tank to like gun this, you know?
Right. Yeah, it's curious because one of the few quote unquote races, and I'll put quote unquote there, that I did not see that happen was Alan Webb's American record in the mile. He is cranking the entire time because he is, again, very motivated, excited. He has a lot of spirit behind him to go set this mile. But like, there's no lull. There, when the pacer steps off, he's going even harder. And that, I think, in a time trial scenario, is a very interesting thing to witness at that high level. But it means it can be done, and that's what I derive from that. It means you don't need to have this lull that typically happens where everyone's getting ready to kick. Oh, I got to save my energy to kick, no matter what the first half of the race was, whether it was honest or whether it was go out and get position and jog around like you see a lot of championship settings. But this concept of saving the energy in the mile, I've never understood it because it's 4-5 minutes at most of running. Like, it's not like a marathon where, there is a lot of, energy reserve and, economy that comes in. I just think 4 to 5 minutes of economy and this concept of applying that similar logic that we take to 2 to 3 hours of racing and running down to 4 to 5 minutes needs to be, better dissected to think about it in more precise terms rather than just this copy and paste job, but deleting a whole bunch of, minutes and moving forward.
Exactly. It's that subtle difference is important. And I think that, you can train to get there. So let's get into the training and the mistakes we made based on this difficulty that the middle distance presents, right? So I'm going to start off with one of my big misconceptions early on. Because although I was a miler, I came at it from a heavy endurance side. Very heavy endurance.
You did, yes. 100-mile weeks in high school, right?
Yep. Thank God for Lydiard, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the things I got when I first started coaching 800 runners was, or 800, 1500 runners with some speed is like, the paradigm stays the same. I'm just going to sprinkle in some more speed work. And by speed work, I meant 400s in 59 seconds, right? 8x400s in 59 for a fast miler or something like that, right? Not sprint work. And I was like, oh, this is how you do it. And instead of spending a 4-week or 6-week anaerobic phase, we'll lengthen that out a little bit. But they still follow the exact same periodization scheme.
Right.
And what I quickly learned is that works for some runners, obviously. But my guys would be so damn flat before we hit that period, it didn't matter. And then we'd be able to have this anaerobic tolerance, whatever you want to call it, but they would have no speed power. And then at the end, I'd be spending 8-9 weeks hammering away this anaerobic tolerance type stuff, and then their endurance capacity would just be crap by the end. Because I robbed Peter to pay Paul, and didn't think oh, I'm gonna lengthen this period out to 9 weeks, and they'll be fine because they're fast guys and they need this stuff. And it was really fascinating to see how much everyone kind of blundered that first part.
Yeah, I can relate. I think the hardest component as a distance coach, because we have such deep and rich literature and examples and coaching education on the aerobic metabolism, and we know that stuff really well. It's exciting. But if all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. And that understanding needs to be an ingredient, definitely, into middle distance preparation and training. But it can't be the lone ingredient, and then you say, oh, we'll tack on this at the end of the season or the cycle, or we'll tack on. A lot of times that was my common folly early on, was I just tack on. Oh, they also need to run faster, so we'll just do one less mile repeat than the 5K or 3K runners, and you guys will instead do 4 times 400 or 400 times 2 and 4 times 200. So another mile's worth of work, quote unquote, faster with some break. And same deal, it just left everyone flat. When the time came to race, which is usually about 90 seconds to go in the mile race, they just didn't have it. They didn't have the juice, man. They wanted to, but they weren't prepared to do so.
And well, you know, sorry to interlude there, but I think this is an important point. And what do you think at that point when you see they don't have the juice? It becomes a cycle, right? You think like, oh man, they don't have the juice to go. Like they must not be tolerating quote unquote lactic acid or whatever you want to call it, right? Byproducts. Like, oh, they need more of this, right?
Right. Yeah, they need to buffer it more. When no, it's, to me, the biggest evolution in my practice has been understanding the biochemistry of neurological processes and how the brain and different hormones and also how synapses and rate coding and all those different things that happen with the brain communicating to the muscles, and then what the brain as a central governor does to influence what you then ask it consciously and even subconsciously to do at a cellular level within the body of the soft tissue, or even your different systems like your cardiovascular respiratory system. All understanding that a little bit better, and I am still in my infancy of understanding. It's super complex. I do not, I'm not a doctor. I have no medical training. I'm just a guy trying to figure out how to make people run faster. And that rabbit hole every day, because we know we're in the, renaissance, or I should say in the infancy of neuroscience, has been very, very helpful to even today. If I typically try to digest and read once a week some type of new neuroscience article, study, what have you, because that stuff is this, it's the wild, wild west. Like we're making the map as we speak, and it's pretty cool. But if we keep just using the model of, and we elect to use the model of the aerobic metabolism that we have a very thorough and plethora of information on, and good information on, as the only map, I think we've done ourselves a disservice. And that was my experience, having been frustrated with, man, my people don't have the juice to go in the last 500 to 400 meters as I'd like them to. Oh, let me do, as Steve said, more of this tolerance work, more of this lactic, dynamic work or lactic threshold work or whatever. That must be the reason. No. I then came to realize it's a brain thing. And so now early day one, I start training the brain.
Well, it's like, the way I like to visualize it in my model is it's like you got to build the capacity to like activate stuff. Right?
Yeah, you got to turn on the lights in the house.
You got to turn on the lights, and you got to first turn on the lights when they're fresh, right? And then you got to train to turn on the lights when they're like when the smoke alarm is going off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's kind of it is. And a lot of times I think what we tend to do, and what we're describing there, is like we never test the light switch. And then all of a sudden the smoke alarm goes off, and we're like, oh, just turn the light on really quick, and like we'll throw this and keep trying, and maybe it'll flip on.
Right. And it doesn't. And it doesn't flip on because it doesn't know. It's not automatic, right? And we want certain, biochemical, processes to be automatic. And that's a lot of what training to me is. That's the lens I look through is, how do I make this substrate of fuel, or if you want to geek out, these hormonal releases, how do you make that a familiar pathway for your body to employ in a high degree of distress in the crux of the race, but have it be automatic and have it not be a barrier to one's ability to want to, because the athlete's sitting there like, I want to beat this person. And then they can't, and like, why can't I beat them? I cognitively want to beat them, but my body's saying, nope, sorry, you got to slow down. You got way too much, toxic byproducts in your system to do anything. And that can be super frustrating. And as coaches, I feel like our job part of our job is to put athletes in a position to be able to do what they want to do in a race and not leave them like, frustrated. And then 9 times out of 10, you say, well, hey, sorry, kid, they're just fitter, or they're better, or they're older, or they have a better PR than you. So I'm sorry, that's why you got beat. But last time I checked, that's our job, is to move the needle and progress people to evolve and grow.
So I think, in this learning from this mistake, because I think, like, I call it the panic, like you panic when things don't work out very well, in the sense that they, didn't have it at that critical point in the race. So when you panic, and I did this when I was young, is like you just throw fast stuff at it, right? You're just like, right. I'll do this really hard stuff, and like until you puke, and then like you're gonna get better, and we'll be fine. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Is it's the model is the problem, right? So
exactly,
as distance runners, we come to the world with this aerobic model, or this physiological model, and what do you base your training off of? Like a lot of distance runners base it on zones, right? Those zones might be on percent VO2 max, or percent of, lactate threshold, or whatever it is. And how you create that shades how you train. Well, if you look at the sprint model, a lot of times it's based on a percentage of a max speed, right? Yeah. And just think of how that changes the training dynamic, where you're like, oh, this is based on a percent of a max speed versus a max like aerobic capacity. Now both models have their flaws, right? But you cannot imagine that sprint coaches with their percent of max speed kind of basis do that, because the demands are seen more as like a neurological, neuromuscular, right? So the energy systems, well taken into account, aren't like the dominant forces. And there was some really good stuff for those who want to dig into it by researcher Peter Wayan, who kind of looks at some of the myths in terms of energy system mechanics and fatigue. Really interesting. Follow him on Twitter. I'll put that in the show notes. But anyway, so it's interesting how this model affects how you see things. And I think going back to these mistake things is like part of the reason we make this mistake as distance runners is we take our model and apply it to an event that is too complex, right? And the opposite, and then I'll let you talk, the opposite actually occurs on the sprint side, right? Where they take their model and maybe have like an 800 or a speed miler, and they make similar mistakes, but in the opposite direction, because their model is based on this sprint, max speed type thing.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We construct and elect how we construct our worldview and the models with which we make decisions. Part of why I am such a fervent reader is to constantly be evolving and being exposed to different worldviews and different mental models about how to make decisions or how to interpret the actions or circumstances of the past. And so that, again, you have to question your model, your worldview. Because if I look at a miler not having the juice in a 1500 meter race that's an honest pace at some say invite, and I interpret it through the lens that it's an aerobic problem, and I keep solving it through that interpretation because that's where my education is based, I'm most comfortable, you're going to be super well intended to want to solve the problem through more aerobic based training, but it might not be because of your limitations or your lack of model exposure and familiarity. Might not be something that you'll employ. And I'll know from talking to my own self, I was very reticent to expand the models I use to prepare middle distance runners, because I saw my mentors and I saw the giants before me have a lot of success employing the models they did. But the reality was it wasn't working for me with the athletes I was coaching, and that's what matters. Remember, you're coaching the athlete in front of you, not coaching an athlete to conform to a theory about training. And we sometimes, I feel like I forget that, and I've spoken with other colleagues and friends who sometimes forget that as well. Like, oh, this person's just not being compliant, blah, 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 blah. And people are getting frustrated, but it's like, well, are you conforming the athlete to a theory, or are you adapting the theory to that living, breathing N01 athlete in front of you? And so the more models you have, right, the more reading you do, the more familiarity you have, then you can make those thinking fast, thinking slow decisions where all of a sudden now you go through this cascade of different opportunity costs and different options, and then you can find the best menu items to address the needs and concerns that lay in front of you. So that's, a little advocation to, keep reading. It's important, but also to understand that you're not alone. The mile is, stupefied coaches for years. Like it still does to me. But now my current practice is, again, to start sprinting or introduce what I call like a sprinting preface day one. So we work on, day one, it's about skills and drills, some form mechanics, making sure people are moving through fluid gait cycles for them. Now, it's not as pretty as sprinters are, because again, that is really important when you're only running 10 to 40 seconds. Like you have to have like crisp mechanics, because it's a difference maker if races are decided by hundreds or thousands of a second. Important to the middle distance runner, yes, because we will be sprinting. But a lot of times people are reticent to do true sprint work, which is like 30-meter fly max velocities, where you're just hauling butt for 30 meters, or 100 acceleration ladders where you're starting at 150 and breaking down to like 60 meters by 10-meter intervals, right? Or for us, another true sprint workout is just what I call flying hundreds, where 10-meter build up and then build up to a max velocity at 40 meters. And then they try to hold that for as long as they can, fighting the decelerative mechanics and tendencies. And so, yeah, we're in here in October sprinting, women at 12.5, men at 11.1, 11.5, right? Because I'm trying to expose them to that. But the precursor to that is getting the tissues and the brain and the energy systems ready for that. So how do I do it? It's called stairs and hills. For me, I found it's a really safe way to employ and get like the kind of the neuromuscular firing, and because we have these little short stairs where it's like quick feet, right? Just get things firing, and then you can skip every other step, right? And power hills, or what I call power stairs. And then you have short hills and long hills, right? You have your mega short hills, which are like the Brad Hudson influence 10-second max sprint hills, which again, another way to introduce the tissues to max sprinting without incurring too much soft tissue damage. And then I have like just medium hills, which are 175, and then long hills 300, right? Typically, the milers I work with, we will do about 4 to 6 sessions, depending on how much time we have in the build-up. Once a week, once every 10 days of stairs and hills, to get them ready to then really hit the track and start sprinting. And then all of a sudden, it builds a tolerance, not just physiologically, neuromuscularly, psychologically. It builds all these tolerances, and then they get to the track, and we're done with stairs and hills, and it's always in the rearview mirror. We never come back to it when the real racing or, preseason starts. And then they just go, and they feel good. And then we can sprint, and we can sprint, and we can sprint, and there's no issues. Because a lot of times, right, people are like, oh, I don't sprint because I pull calf or my Achilles or that. I go, guys, 400-meter and down runners, they sprint year round and they're fine. Like, why are we the ones pulling hamstrings and calves? Like, we're out of alignment. So I think those are the ways I've addressed it, in today with the environment and terrain I have. But Steve, I also like to hear how you've done it, especially from afar with someone like a Mark English or, even a Leah Wallace, who you coach at the tail end of their career. That'd be kind of curious to hear.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back first to 2010, way back in the day.
Way back machine.
When I coached a bunch of high school kids, and I only have this pulled up here because I'm doing a blog post on one of them who I now coach for the marathon. So pay attention to that, and go check out High Performance West to see what I'm talking about. Nice little preview there. But in January 2010, getting ready for a high school track season, which for guys running the mile and 2 mile. Listen to this. First week, Wednesday, 8 by 10 second hill sprints. Next week, 6 by 60 meter sprints and excels on the track. Next Wednesday, 6 by hill sprints plus 1 by 20 second hill sprint. So lengthening it. Next week, 4 by 80 meters on the track sprints plus 1x150 sprints. And I could go on and on and on. But the point here is I'm looking back and I'm like, dang, young Steve, you did something kind of right. Right?
Yeah, everyone knows you're smarter than I am. So yeah, good job.
I'm just showing you. The evidence is there. It's all right. Some of it takes some people it takes a while to learn,
This is true, but at least you're here and you're open to learning. And two, you also had Rasco as a mentor.
That's right. I did. My boy. Very underrated coach, by the way. He gets a lot of crap.
Probably the most underrated middle distance coach in American coaching history.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say that.
I agree. I mean, I was very fortunate. Again, if I don't think I would have had these thoughts or learned these lessons unless I spent a lot of time on that aerobic long side, and then 2 years of my life getting coached by a guy who's kind of approached things from a different lens. So thank you, Rasco, for influencing me. And a large part is that's why I did this stuff. But anyways,
yeah, I mean, and at that time, right, 2010 is like cutting edge, and I still feel like I feel like I told you, I joked I was late to the train, and I just got on just at the right time, but I'm still amazed as I look for more literature and more sharing of this type of awareness. It's not front and center as it could be. The last USATF or USTF CCCA, so the college coaches conventions I went to, at the time, I forget the gentleman's name. He's, I think, the head coach at Boston University now, and he was an assistant coach at Florida for the middle distances. Yes, Spangler.
Yeah.
So Spangler was at Virginia Military Institute, and he related a story of how they had this rite of passage for the cadets freshman year or what have you, that they had to run stairs as just part of the natural initiation process, and they had to do it every Tuesday or something, and they make these cadets run up and down just stair repeats, so up 8 flights, just up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And it was only when they were freshmen. And he started to make this connection. They had super big jumps from cross-country season to indoor in their track PRs all the way up to 5K, 3K, 5K, huge wild jumps. But then that stopped sophomore year. They no longer had to do it. They've completed the rite of passage. And so they weren't doing all these stair repeats in the fall and winter. And then they just didn't progress quite at the same rate or even close to it. They couldn't even light a candle. And I walked away from that one being like, huh. And that's what spurred my callus of thought about integrating stair repeats into the early season programming for middle distance runner. And it's been to great effect.
Here's one for you, okay? So
yes, please.
My high school coach, great coach, brilliant coach, Coach Stewart, relayed I believe it was him, relayed a message of listening to other coaches and listening to Arthur Lydiard talk about training in Texas. And I think it was his high school coach who went to this Arthur Lydiard symposium in the 60s or 70s or something way back in the day, right? And Lydiard says, hey, here's my hill phase. This is where we're going to do hills. Someone raises their hand and says, have you looked around? There are no hills, right? It's zero.
Right.
And Lydiard turns and points and says, you see those giant stadiums you guys build? There are your hills, right?
Yeah.
And it was same thing applies to all the hill springs and things I'm teaching you. You've got all these stairs, utilize them. And I think it's one of the, it's almost so old school because we did this in junior high. It's go run the stadium steps, right?
Yeah,
but what you have to get away from as a coach is from mindlessly assigning, hey, go do stadium stairs, to thinking about it in terms of, all right, what am I trying to get out of this? And you said, is it that quickness where you're just nailing each step, or is it some sort of power component where you're trying to skip steps and get a little bit more of a push, right? But it's a great example of like using your surroundings. And the same thing happens with, you were asked about like Mark English. Like there's some times in the year like where we can't really sprint that much because it's Ireland. Right? So
it's true.
So like the speeds aren't there, but he's doing some very short hill stuff, because like what the research shows is, if you try and activate it, your brain's trying to do it, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So if I'm trying to put full force in there, like I'm going to get a very strong activation signal, even if my body isn't able to maybe put the full force that I could if it was, 80 degrees out and sunny and feeling great. So, a lot of it is like taking that into consideration. And then I think, the other thing you mentioned was talking about Leah, and I'm going to bring this into one of my mistakes I made, is I took some of Leah's capacities for granted. So what does that mean? I looked at what her past coaches had done, which was really good. What she was bringing to the table, and I thought like, oh, okay, like this girl's got the goods. Like all I have to do is like not mess her up, right? And in having that mindset, I remember at the very start, we kind of messed up a little bit because I didn't realize the work that it took to maintain some of the things that she built, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she had very good kind of sprint mechanics, very good acceleration that we kind of kept along there. But I didn't realize like how much work it took to develop that other side for her.
Right.
And I was just like, oh, like you've got good speed and you've got this. Like we'll just kind of, do enough to keep this in check and keep developing this other side on the speed side, and you'll be all right. And actually for her, like we got in a rush and forgot that it takes time to build that side. So like her aerobic component wasn't probably where it needed to be at the start of the year because we were trying to come off injuries and get race ready.
Right. And that's another common mistake I made early on in my career too, was just defaulting and saying, oh, you're just blessed with the wiry, bouncy, natural disposition to run insanely fast. It's just that's set in stone. It's these muscle fibers that you just come with, and there's nothing we can do. So we might as well just elevate the aerobic metabolism and make you darn efficient from a cardiovascular respiratory gaseous exchange point, and then let you hopefully get as far to the end of the race unfatigued as possible so you can then just, use your talent, quote unquote. And it's like, I realized that thinking is just very absolutist and wrong. Like more and more, I'm shying away from reductionism thought, where we just take all the parts together in isolation and we say we're going to do like this and this and this, because I realize it's complex ecosystems that are all interrelated. But then two, when you have an absolutist mindset, that's also a static mindset, which is a no growth mindset. And so you can't get better, you can't improve. And I had to throw that junk out the window and say, well, maybe there's more out there. And yeah, it took a lot of digging and a lot of these anecdotes and circumstantial evidence and people's perspectives and all me getting creative. But once I strangled that concept and I just walked away from it, I got a lot better as a coach, because I said, you can't have an influence with what you do, not just on the track or, running, but also too in the quote unquote weight room and applying plyometrics. Another thing is I didn't understand plyos, because everyone says plyos. And you're like, okay, yeah, what does that mean? And it's difficult to know when and where to do them and how to do them, because again, it's no one's fault. There's just not a whole lot of good, literature and anecdotes out there about here's a safe prescription to do with plyometric training, but it's vital. And now, these days, I've incorporated some degree of plyos into all my milers training and preparation in some small way, 3 to 5 times a week.
So I want to get to, before you get into the details, because I'm really interested to hear these. I think that gets to a bigger phenomenon, right? Which is what I'd call the like check the box phenomenon.
Yeah.
Right? Because like we learn like, and it's funny, you talk about plyos, and I had it written down on my list while we're, talking right here is like, oh, what else did I mess up? Oh, plyos. Yes. So it's one of those things, like, there we go, we have it in common. But I think the reason is because when you get into a new coaching area, like middle distance or milers or whatever, you think like, oh, what are the things that everyone's talking about that they need to do? And as you be a good coach and you read and you research and you go to conventions and hear presentations, plyos come out. And
right.
I was like, oh, I need to add plyos in. So I need to check this box, right? And I try and check that box without having a full understanding of what's the real purpose, how do I progress this? What maybe possible side effects, drawbacks do exist besides like this is something that I should do? And really do a deep dive on understanding how to integrate and also how to coach from a biomechanical standpoint. Like what are the cues and the point of emphasis? And, what happened with me is I just kind of not threw them in there, but for, lack of a better term, kind of did throw them in there. Like, there was more thought than that, but it's like, oh, we need to do these, so I'm inserting plyos.
Right, and you need to rank order the reason you're integrating that into the precious time that you have to train every day. There's only so much you can do, right? So sometimes you might listen to me and Steve, and it's just like, man, it's overwhelming. Only the pros can do all this stuff throughout the day. Like, no, my practice... long practices are 3-hour days with the running component involved. That's the max threshold I take anyone to. Over 3 hours, we just shut it down. It's over. We're done. We're out, because I'm not going to be able to get, and nor are you going to be able to produce any kind of, adaptation from and response from this type of work when you're too fatigued, right? So there's always a fine line. We want to do things when fresh, but we also want to expose people to progressively increasing layers of fatigue, but not what I call, being on total empty. Like that's no good. Because again, you don't learn anything here. So in order to take a step back, rank order what you have time for. And so for me, early plyos are just small little, very executable tasks, like little bunny hops over 6-inch baby hurdles, or just bunny hops on the turf or on the track. This just kind of gets what I champion about plyos is reactive forces. So I want people to do that when they hit the ground. Their foot comes up off the ground as quickly as possible. I say it's like hot coals. Minimize contact time on the ground. That's the first thing I want to teach. Minimize the contact time on the ground, so they get used to bringing the foot off, rather than the distance where it stays static. It lopes. Their foot is like a tree. It roots into the ground, and then you got to restart. No. Bring it up. And so I teach that cue and that emphasis first. And then I start to get more into the more like tricky nuances, right? Where now we're trying to not just bring the foot off the ground, but strike the ground real hard. So then we create an increased reactive force where I'm now forcing the foot to come down with gravity into the ground, so I can get that return back out even more forceful, right? So I'm just elementary scaffolding the elementary laws of physics through how they're jumping bilaterally, 2 feet at a time, not even messing with unilateral, not even single foot yet. And so that takes 3 weeks of just good, steady, small little incremental dosage, making sure that they're fluid, they're in sync, and that's great. Then we start to progress to box jumps. Jump up onto the box from bilateral, about 2 to 3 foot box. Just jump onto it and then just land stable. Boom. Then they get familiar with that. Then we start to integrate some potentiation work where we might do quick bunny hops in place, holding a 6-pound or 8-pound med ball, and then seeing how quickly they can jump up all into the box. And then finally, the last thing is actually eccentric jumps, where we're jumping backwards down off a box and then quickly back up onto the box. So stop-start is you being on top of the box, but you jump down on the ground and go boom, right back up very quickly. That's very, very tough to do. It's very tough on the tissues. It's very tough from a coordination standpoint. When I first started incorporating plyos with younger athletes, I jumped to that too soon, and I incurred a lot of lower leg injuries or kids just hitting their shin on the box because they were too discoordinated. So I've learned to be like, whoa, let's not get them hurt. Rule 1 of training, right? Do no harm. Let's not get them hurt. But what I found is preparing not only the neuromuscular architecture as well as the tissues to absorb, respond, interpret, and then figure out what to do with these reactive forces has really allowed the people that I work with now to sprint year round or run 200-meter reps on down faster than they ever have year round without any attacks, without any Achilles tendonitis, without any hamstring pulls, without, we've really minimized that because we've taken the time, and this is about a 2-month process in the early phases of a training program calendar to just kind of set the tissue. I call it setting the mind and tissues up for success. And that's how I learned to slowly integrate plyos into my work. And then it's just like any stimulus, right? You don't need to do a lot of it, but you just do enough to create a little consistency of remembrance and exposure for the rest of the season. So then we just do plyos, sometimes in warm up for, drills, or sometimes just on and a part of the lift is just some box jumps, guys. So you're just kind of maintaining the stimulus by that point, but not trying to accelerate or improve it, because again, rank order, the most important thing come in season is people to recover, run fast, compete well, and get on to the next round so they can hopefully, for my purposes as a high performance coach, be held to account to have a shot to make the podium at the championship race of target.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned, and I learned this at Vern Gambetta's Gain Conference, which is really awesome, you should check it out, is that I teach landing. So we do a lot of stuff where we, stand on a box, small box, put a foot over, and then just drop onto that foot, and teach how to land before we even teach how to respond and react up, right?
Love it. Yeah.
I think that when you look at plyos, and I loved your kind of progression through there, when you look at introducing plyos or anything like this, is you got to go back to the basics and make sure that you cover the things that are important, and assume that they don't know how to. So you almost have to
you can't take it for granted. Yeah. And I took it for granted, and it ended up getting the athletes hurt because I thought, they jump out the gym, they dunk a basketball, they know how to land, and you're spot on. You can't take it for granted, even with adults.
Yeah, it's like the John Wooden, teach someone how to tie their shoes, right? So they don't get blisters. I think a lot of times, and I'm so guilty of this, is taking for granted and thinking this person's world class, or this person's national class, or this person came from these other sports. They know how to do this basic stuff. Or in the collegiate setting, realizing that, hey, I've been doing this for 5 years now, or whatever it is, and, you just kind of take some things for granted that early on maybe you, really taught and really, nailed down because you had to get all these kids because they were new to understand what you were trying to accomplish. So, whenever you're introducing things that add some sort of stress, step one is break it down and say, all right, what are the components that they might not bring to the table, right? What are the skills that they might not know how to do? And whether that's landing, whether that's reacting, whether that's the sensation of how to interact with the ground, all those things are teachable moments where, you as a coach need to step up and get it done before you actually get to the fun, sexy stuff of hey, we're going to do these plyos and maybe add some hurdle hops and maybe do, this complex stuff, which all has to come much later down the line.
Yeah. I mean, again, you just have to be very clear about the response you're encouraging from a stimuli. So whatever stimulus you apply, you just need to know this is the response that I want, or these number of responses. And then, whether it's physiologically based or psychologically based, you need to know. And then you can elect to include it in your program or not. I can tell you, as Steve was talking here and thinking more along the themes of what our podcast is, another thing that I don't do as much of that I once did with middle distance runners is 400-meter repeats. I just don't do quarters as much. And I just came to this decision a little while ago, a couple of seasons ago, that it was just a little bit too in between of a stimulus for a lot of the athletes I worked with. It wasn't fast enough to be really fast. It wasn't hard. It was hard, but it may be too hard. And it's just for a miler, because typically you hear a lot of times it's like running quarters at, race pace, and then creating an interval package that, has you running quarters at date race pace or goal race pace. The only time my people really run quarters now is broken, threshold in work, or as accelerative 200s within a quarter. So an example would be running 400 at a certain, or the first 200 of a 400 at a certain speed, and then really accelerating a lot the last 200. So an example for a female might be first 200 at 35, second 200 at 34, 33, right? And now we were breaking it down. So it's not a quarter in terms of the classical global context of how fast did they run one lap. It's how fast did they break down that lap within this 200-meter segments, right? So I've gone really far away from those because for me, I've employed a lot of it because, again, it just makes sense. Run one lap very quickly over and over and over again, and you'll create a tolerance and a stimulus, and it will work. And I just found for me it didn't work, and I got away from it.
Yeah, and I think that's where you test things out. I mean, we use 400s because I like to use them sometimes.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with them. For me, it's just I look back to my training after reflecting the last couple of years, and I just looked back at all the middle distance riders coaching. Oh, the quarters just went away.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I remember early on I used to do a lot of what I'd call like straight repeats, like 8x K, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over time, like we still do them occasionally, but over time there's more like mixed and blended intervals where it might be like, a couple sets of 1200 K 8-6, right? Where we're kind of blending through things versus going straight on a stimulus. And I think that's the important thing to realize is it's not that any one workout type or style is wrong or worse or better. They all have their place, but it's like how you utilize those in your own training programs, and that reflection piece on saying like this probably shouldn't be here, or we're not getting the bang for our buck that I want out of this, so maybe I should try and incorporate more 300s or 500s or whatever it is, instead of being stuck on, all right, to run the mile I have to do like the traditional banister workout of 10 by 400, and like we'll get it done. But like you look at Bannister, why do you do that? Well, he had 40 minutes in his lunchtime or hour in his lunchtime, and it was like, how am I most efficiently going to train for the mile? That makes perfect sense, right?
It was a product of his constraints, and sometimes you have to employ that. But it just, again, reflection is key here, right? And I was having dinner with Ricky Sues, the late David Torrance's coach, a couple months ago when I was down in Phoenix for a weekend, and he and I were talking about miler training and reminiscing about David, and I asked him, well, what was different this year with David? Because before he passed, he was having quite the breakout year. I mean, he set meet record Adrian Martinez. I mean, he came back from being an Olympian in the 5K, and before he passed, he was like, no, I'm back in the 15. I'm focusing back on the 15, and then really started to show some foot speed he hadn't touched since 2012. And Ricky had said, we started to do 300 and 250 meter repeats. And I go, yeah, same with me. For like Daniel Herrera or Eleanor Fulton, a lot of their work was 250 meter repeats, not 200 and not 150, because I had been taught that 150 meter sprints was like a good middle distance sprint workout for 800 miler types. And it had worked to success, but again, with the people I was working with, I felt like it was just kind of flat. But when we lengthened it by 100 meters to 250, or, lengthened it to 200 by 100 meters to 300s, and they were good, fast ones, like he and I both came to the conclusion, and also him based off his early training and tutelage, that made him into an Olympian. He was like, I just think they create a different accountability and tolerance within your body and psychology that a 200 and a 150 don't. He's like, I don't think they're hard enough, but I'm not going to ask him to run an all-out quarter because that's too hard. And so he found comfort in the fact that it worked for David. And then I employed it just on my own as well because I came to the similar line of thought. And the athletes I, employed it with showed a lot of success in their events for them this year as well. And so it's also that reflection and a dialogue with other coaches, which has been invaluable, right?
Well, there's also a component of like making sure your ideas stay fresh and change, right?
And you're just not crazy and on this crazy island, like, we're going to do this and it's going to work. And then it's like, and we're like, dude, your head's up your butt. Yeah.
Like, so on either extreme, there's those who have no philosophy whatsoever and just like almost do things like haphazardly, randomly. On the other side of that extreme, that continuum, there's the people who like repeat the same cycle of workouts over and over again for the last 20 years. And like you got to find yourself somewhere in the middle where you're flexible enough to like change ideas while keeping that which works. When Danny, Mackie, and I were in New Zealand, we kind of came around to this idea based on like the 80-20 rule a little bit, in the sense that like 80% of the stuff that we do is we're going to keep from year to year because it's the bread and butter that generally works, right? That we've time tested, makes sense. We're going to tweak it here and there, but it's the stuff that we must have in our training program. But then there's this 20% on the other side that is where we're going to, maybe change and innovate and all that stuff. And as a coach, it's knowing and reflecting enough to know what that 20% is and where you can change, adapt, and grow.
And that's sometimes the scariest thing, because if it's working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But I think you got to grow. And by growing, you have to try new things. I'm curious, before we wrap up here, Steve, we've gone through a bunch of things, but talking with Gareth about the whole speed reserve concept, he, was on this world tour. He's had some time to digest it and repackage it. Like, what are some things from your trip to New Zealand? And again, with you and him and Danny being there and kind of dialoguing with all these other national class coaches of New Zealand, that you learned from a speed reserve or middle distance standpoint that would be of one, selfishly value to me, and also two, more appropriately a value to everyone listening.
Yeah, well, I think so. To give a little background, Gareth Sanford doing his PhD on speed reserve, which is basically, you look at the max sprint speed obtained over like a 50-meter sprint, and then you look at their maximal aerobic speed and look at the difference there, and you get a nice little number. The number isn't super important, but basically you're comparing like their speed versus endurance, right? And what was very interesting is hearing some of the misconceptions or the ideas that haven't quite caught on that he noticed. So Gareth tested some of the best athletes, like really good world-class athletes. He went around to, God knows how many programs and talked to so many coaches. So he had this nice lens of comparing things. And just some of the concepts that are still stuck in the sense of, we can't train this max speed capacity. Well, yeah, you can, right?
Yes, you can.
What a lot of coaches did is they compared 400-meter time to like mile time and said 400 tells me this about his speed and the mile tells me this. And, Gareth was pointing out, he's like, well, the 400 depends on speed reserve too, right?
Right.
And you might be missing this component where it's like, hey, this guy might run 49 just because he's never developed his basic speed. And maybe if we gave him the capacity to express it, perhaps mechanically, then maybe that 49 goes to 47 with no metabolic change, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which can and does happen. So those ideas on making sure you see the full picture, making sure that you know that everything to a degree is trainable, and you're looking at like where the weak spots are and where those limiting factors are, and addressing those as a coach. And I think the other thing that was really fascinating listening to Gareth talk, and maybe we'll have him on the podcast one time just to...
Oh, we should. Brilliant idea.
Sometimes I come up with them.
Hey, yes, that's true. That's why you have 2 books and I have 0.
There we go. So, one of the interesting things was he was like, he talked about the dichotomy, how this sprint versus endurance world view, and how a lot of times they're just lacking the other idea and component. He said he'd go talk
stay siloed, and it's one or the other.
It's siloed, and you're either in this group or in this group. And he was like talking about the British system, for example, and he was like, well, the 1500 training in Great Britain kind of developed off a Coe-Horwell model and worked really well with several athletes and then disappeared. And that kind of became a dominant middle distance model. And he was like, but think about it. Those athletes who had maybe some sort of aerobic strength component in there would do really well with it. But what about the other side that maybe didn't too well, or maybe we lost out on all these people, right? And should we adopt this as our sole model for the middle distance because it worked for some people when we can clearly see that there's distinct groups of 800 runners? So what's interesting, he said, if you look at, depending on what schools I selected in the U.S. college system, some would look endurance-based and some would look speed-based, and they'd all have really good people. But if I just self-selected a couple of these and said, hey, this is the way to train for the 800 because these guys had success, and that took over as the dominant model, now we're screwing over the other, third, half, whatever of the population. And the reality is, this is his conclusion, not mine. Well, it's mine too, but his statement, so I'm not taking credit. But he said, we need to understand how to train all sides of the spectrum as a coach so that we have all those tools in our tool shed. And then the athlete who presents himself in front of us, I say, all right, you're coming from this side, these things are important, and this is what you express to me, so this is what we do. And it's not, hey, I'm a Frank Horwell, Peter Coe disciple. This is how you train middle distance runners.
Well, that's the easy approach, right? And that's, I think, if you're listening to this podcast and you've been with us since day one, thank you. You come to realize it's a more holistic impetus that we try to take. And I think it's the only way. It's the only path to really see people thrive and get better. You have to be able to reflect. You have to be able to admit faults, like Steve and I have done many times, and probably will do many times more. Because if you can't, it's a clear signal in all the noise that is being spouted out today that you're actually not getting better and not growing, because you need to move the needle forward. And that's, honest to goodness, what we're really trying to do here with this pod, highperformancewest.com, and everything that Steve and I put out. It's about making a contribution and us saying, look, we just are trying to help move the needle forward so everyone can, come to the table and eat. And we build this longer table, then we all get better. And it's been so awesome to hear people come to me or Steve and say, thank you for the encouragement. I started to talk to other coaches. I started to, tap into high school coaches if I'm a college coach, college coaches if I'm a high school coach, pro coaches if I'm a high school coach, what have you, in an effort to get some of their experience and wisdom and to help get me better and have this exchange. Because those are the most vital things. And it's why Steve and I started the pod, right? And it's why we're now doing highperformancewest.com with the workout of the day and the daily blog and the other, offerings we're going to start contributing here, is to create this dialogue so we all thrive. And, that's why we put ourselves out here as well and just go on a limb and say, yeah, we're only here now because we messed up and we found a solution. So, and I'm sure we'll probably say the same thing about practices we're employing now 3 years down the road.
Yep, most likely. So you're listening to something that is wrong, and I apologize for that.
I don't know where, but we'll go back 3 years from now and say, "Hey guys, sorry, that one."
Exactly, something we said is off. But
yes.
yeah,
thanks for coming here. We're happy to give the people what they want.
There you go. Appreciate you guys listening. As always, reach out to us. Visit highperformancewest.com. Check out all the cool stuff that we're doing, and reach out and let us know if there's something else you want to hear about. I mean, we've had several listeners reach out and kind of say, hey, can you talk about this? Or, hey, can you write about this? And it really helps guide us to understand where we should take things, because it really is about, giving the people what they want, as Jon said, but, further coaching education, coaching knowledge, that, table of knowledge that we all have and bring to it, so that we're in a better spot now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, to where we are now.
And they're great questions, by the way. They're great questions. A lot of people are like, I feel stupid for writing this or asking this. I'm like, no. I've yet to come across a question that wasn't really thoughtful, complex, and important. So if you do have a question, please, seriously, reach out. Again, our response might not be 24 hours. It might be a week, or it might materialize into a blog post or a podcast. But honest to goodness, those questions, I'm always shocked at amazed at and I shouldn't be, honestly, but I'm humbled to be able to speak to such an intellectual audience that has this, hunger to get better, and ask some really good ones. And sometimes I don't even know, Steve does, we got to go ask our mentors or ask our colleagues and say, hey, how would you answer this? So don't hesitate, please. That's the worst thing you can do. And don't forget as well, the other worst thing you can do is not getting your freebie for being a day one person on coaching with Magness and Marcus at highperformancewest.com. So go to the tab that says day one. It'll be locked with a passcode. And again, the password is on coaching day one, all lowercase, and the one is the number one. On coaching day one, all lowercase. And I look forward to sending you a little something in the mail as a thank you for 3 years of just showing up and being here and, allowing us the honor and privilege to make a contribution.
You showed up, so get free stuff. That's the bottom line.
There it is.